While Zelda games usually have very fun overworld exploration, dungeons are the real meat and potatoes of any given Zelda title, so I felt like talking about all of them. This is the beginning of my Dungeons Ranked series. I'm going to be covering every 3D Zelda dungeon, and then at some point go back and do all the 2D dungeons. Oh, and just a quick disclaimer, I will not be covering any of the final challenge dungeons of these games, so stuff like Ganon's Tower from Ocarina of Time and the Moon from Majora's Mask will not be included in these videos. Instead, I'll be doing a video of its own covering each of the 3D final challenge dungeons. Nevertheless, going in release order, this is Dungeons Ranked Ocarina of Time. I don't think this is a very controversial pick for last place. Jabu Jabu's Belly is simultaneously a frustrating and lackluster experience. The idea of a dungeon being inside of a giant fish that sucks you into its mouth is pretty cool, honestly, but compared to the other two Child Link dungeons, and especially all of the Adult Link dungeons, it's clear that this is the weakest. After walking through the entranceway, you meet Princess Ruto, who is incredibly snobby and annoying. She refuses to follow you herself, so you have to escort her through this dungeon by picking her up and carrying her, which stops you from defending yourself against bubbles of stomach acid and flying stingray creatures. The puzzles here amount to step on this button and the door will open, and oh no, this button won't stay down, so I better set the Zora Princess on top of it. The music in this one is fine, but the dungeon item, the boomerang, is admittedly pretty cool, though you honestly won't be using it much outside of the fish's belly since this is the final child dungeon and for some reason Adult Link is incapable of using it. I do quite like the mini-boss and actual dungeon boss though. The mini-boss being this giant Octorok squid thing and the real boss being Baranade, this enormous electric flower creature. He shoots shockwaves at you, so you gotta use the boomerang to stun him before wailing on him with your sword. It's a pretty fun fight and it honestly feels good to rid Jabu Jabu of this parasite. Also, Princess Ruto gets the hots for Link after that, even asking him to marry her, so that's pretty cool. I don't hate this dungeon or anything, but it's definitely my least favorite of this game. This one is slightly more interesting than Jabu Jabu, but it's honestly just kind of boring as well. Lots of explosions here. You bomb walls, you fight Dodongo enemies that blow up when you defeat them, and you throw bombs into the mouth of the boss, King Dodongo, which is an okay fight. It takes the classic concept from Zelda 1 of force-feeding bombs to Dodongos, but makes it bigger and more cinematic. But it's a very simple and easy fight. The dungeon item here is, you guessed it, the bombs. They're one of the most useful items in the game inside and outside of dungeons, and because you obtain them here, that's gotta count for a few extra points. The music in this one is practically non-existent. It's basically just atmospheric cave noises. It suits the environment, I guess, but most dungeons have very memorable music, so this one is easily the least interesting. I like the theming though with the giant Dodongo skull, which has a pretty cool puzzle. You drop bombs into its eye sockets and it opens its mouth to reveal a door. I love stuff like that. Speaking of puzzles, I think they're more interesting and engaging here than in Jabu Jabu's Belly. You've got some simple torch lighting puzzles, but you've also got this one room where you find a button that needs to be held down, and there's a big block just out of reach, so you need to come around this big loop fighting enemies on the way, just to be able to access the block. Also, there's 2 mini-boss fights here, but they're nothing special. Just some Lizalfos hopping around, though a nice design touch is that the second mini-boss room is situated right above the first one. I always forget about this until I'm playing and look down and I'm like, ooh, that's cool. But yeah, Dodongo's Cavern is fine enough for an early game dungeon. Out of the 3 Child Link dungeons, the very first one is the strongest in my opinion. It's much simpler than Dodongo's Cavern, and the boss is less interesting than in Jabu Jabu's Belly, but I think the theming, fire-burning puzzles, the silly Deku scrubs, and the dungeon item, the slingshot, all make it a more fun and engaging dungeon for me compared to the other 2 Child Link dungeons. The fact that you are inside of the Deku Tree, a wise and beloved figure amongst the Kokiri, makes the dungeon experience feel sacred almost. This feeling is also perpetuated by the music, which again is definitely the best out of the 3 Child dungeons. It's mysterious, intriguing with its slow, whistling synths. Puzzle-wise, I think this dungeon has some great introductory puzzles for new players. My favorite part is definitely jumping from a ledge higher up, busting through a huge spider web and falling down to the second half of the dungeon. It's just such a cool moment. There's no mini-boss here, but there are plenty of Skulltulas hanging around, and the slingshot is fun to use on the mini Skulltulas that climb around on the vines. I also love the Deku Scrubs that inhabit the place. They're super defensive at first, but if you reflect the nuts they spit back at them, they are immediately super apologetic and even help by giving you advice. They sell each other out, and one of them even tells you the way to beat their queen, which is the boss, Goma. Her design is super creepy. She climbs along the ceiling and spits out eggs, giving birth to little baby spiders if you aren't fast enough to destroy the eggs. Nevertheless, the fact that this is the very first 3D Zelda dungeon and it still holds up this well is a testament to just how great Ocarina still is. The Shadow Temple's alright. Theming-wise, it's pretty intriguing, as this was once a prison where the Sheikah would torture their criminals. There's guillotines and shit like that, and because this is below the graveyard, there's otherworldly spirits about. For me though, this is the weakest of the 5 adult Link dungeons for a couple reasons. 1, using the Lens of Truth to solve puzzles is a little cumbersome, especially since it only covers this little circle in the middle of the screen. 2, the dungeon item here, the hover boots, are probably my least favorite item in the game. I guess it's cool that you can cross bigger gaps with them, but why do they have sliding ice physics? It makes me never want to use them unless I absolutely have to. And 3, the mini-boss is just a rehash of the boss you fight at the bottom of the well right before this dungeon. Yeah, it has a cool design and is kinda horrifying, but I wish it was something unique to this dungeon. This is a very straightforward dungeon navigation-wise, super linear. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just not exactly what I look for in a good dungeon. You basically just go in a straight line, getting keys along the way, finally getting the boss key, and then heading off to fight it. The boss here, though, is fucking awesome. You fall into the boss room, which is literally just a giant drum, and suddenly this fucker Bongo comes out of the shadows and starts banging on the drum, causing you to bounce. So, you have to use the hover boots to avoid being bounced, you have to use the Lens of Truth to see him, and you have to use your bow to shoot his signature Nintendo disembodied hands and eyeball. I swear to God, Nintendo will never pass up an opportunity to have a boss with disembodied floating hands. But yeah, it's a fun fight, conceptually and mechanically, but that doesn't save the Shadow Temple from being my least favorite of the adult Link dungeons. The Fire Temple's cool. Theming wise, it's fairly generic, literally just a fire temple. You've got ancient inscriptions and lava everywhere. The music is pretty cool. In the 1.0 Nintendo 64 version of the game, they actually sampled Muslim chanting, which was later removed, but in the 3DS version, they bring back that melody with some little vocal synths, which is a nice touch. At the start, you meet up with Darunia, who tells you that Ganondorf has imprisoned a bunch of Gorons in the temple, so you're on a prison break mission to free all of them. Darunia goes ahead to try and take on the dungeon boss, but says he's worried as he doesn't have the legendary hammer with him. So, you're off to free the Gorons. There are a few puzzles scattered throughout the dungeon, but it's mostly an action platforming oriented experience. It's fairly linear, like the Shadow Temple, but I end up liking the traversal here a bit more. You free a Goron, get a key, and continue onwards until you fight the mini-boss, this fire dancer of sorts. It's a cool design, and I love the juxtaposition between the elegant dancer and the tiny-legged creature that falls out when you bomb it. However, it's a very boring fight, honestly, and they make you do it twice for some reason. But finally, at some point, you get the dungeon item, the Megaton Hammer, and this thing packs a punch. I especially love this part where you smack down on this pillar and it takes you all the way back down to where you met Darunia at the beginning. There's one more Goron to save, and then it's off to fight the boss, Volvagia. I like this fight. There's all these lava holes in the ground, and the dragon will peek his head out of one of them, so you gotta bash him with your hammer, whack-a-mole style. Then he flies up in the air, and you gotta shoot him with your bow. Rinse and repeat until he's dead. The lack of puzzles in this dungeon and repetitiveness of freeing the Gorons brings it down just a bit for me, but it's still a lot of fun. For years, the Water Temple has been notorious in the gaming community for being tedious and confusing, and yeah, on the original Nintendo 64 version of Ocarina, that kinda was the case, but on 3DS version, this dungeon is awesome. Yeah, there is still a tiny bit of tedium, mostly due to the temple's symmetrical and slightly non-linear nature, making it easy to lose track of which way you should be going. But the markings telling you where all the water control points are, plus the addition of being able to equip the iron boots to a face button, get rid of 90% of the tedium from this dungeon. Theming-wise, it's got this ancient Japanese temple architecture, complete with statues of water dragons. And the music reflects that aesthetic. There's higher reverb synths and bells that sound really watery. And then there are little flute melodies, and eventually what sounds like a stringed Japanese koto comes in. It's such a great track. The puzzles here are a little more complex than most of the other dungeons in the game, and I quite like that. You have to raise and lower the water level to get to different areas of the dungeon, collecting several small keys on the way until you eventually reach the mini-boss, Dark Link. Conceptually, this is one of the most interesting mini-bosses in the series. You walk into this crazy liminal space and you have to fight your own shadow. The fight seems frustrating and kind of difficult at first, since Dark Link will mirror all of your moves, rendering your attacks almost useless. That is, until you learn that if you stop Z-targeting Dark Link, he has a much harder time trying to replicate your moves. Nevertheless, you beat him and get the long shot, an upgrade to your hook shot, which makes it shoot twice as far. Then you have one more puzzle to get the boss key, and it's off to fight the boss, Morpha. It's this amoeba that can control the water, making it literally able to grab Link and throw him across the room.
I see amoebas and parasites.
This is another case where the concept of the fight is more interesting than the actual fight. You just have to grab Morpha with a long shot and slash away until it's dead. It's an okay fight, but the rest of the dungeon is pretty awesome, especially on the 3DS. Oh, the Forest Temple isn't at number 1? No, I mean, the Forest Temple is great, but it's not quite my favorite. The theming here is kind of unmatched though. This is easily some of the best theming of any Zelda dungeon. At first glance from the outside, it just looks like a ruined temple deep in the Sacred Forest meadow. But once you enter and explore a bit, you realize that this is actually an abandoned haunted mansion of sorts. It seems people might have lived here at one point. You've got carpeted hallways, grassy courtyards, and painting frames hanging in stairwells. It's awesome. The music here goes crazy. Haunting synth pads, repeating voice samples, and other instruments drenched in delay and reverb. Puzzle-wise, it's alright. Some pushing block stuff and some shooting eyeballs. It's the context of why you're doing these puzzles that's way more interesting here. When you enter the dungeon, you're tasked with hunting down 4 Poes, each a different color. To get to them, you have to change the layouts of twisted hallways, battle armored Stalfos, and eventually use the dungeon item, the bow, to shoot paintings of the Poes and then defeat them to light the 4 giant torches in the central room. Once you've collected 3 of them, the 4th one ends up being the mini-boss, which has a cool design, but it's kind of a clunky fight. The targeting system always screws me over a little bit during it. Nevertheless, you use the elevator to go down, solve one more little puzzle, and then you fight the boss, Phantom Ganon. This fight is awesome. Phantom Ganon rides a dark horse through the paintings on the walls, and you have to use the bow to fire away at him. Eventually, he begins to float around and shoot some sort of magic energy at you, and you gotta deflect it back at him. Classic Zelda shit right here. Yeah, I know this is a lot of people's favorite dungeon in the entire series, and I love it a lot too, but there's one more dungeon in Ocarina that I like just a little bit more. The Spirit Temple is awesome. Taking place in an ancient desert colossus, its theming is so cool with its giant deity statues and dusty, sanded chambers. The music is also one of my favorite tracks in the entire series. I kind of have a bias towards desert-themed music, and this track is incredible. The chimes and strings and woodwinds just all come together to create the sense that you are really in an ancient desert temple. This dungeon is unique in that it's the only dungeon in the game where you can play as both Child Link and Adult Link. When you first show up as an adult, you're not able to progress at all, so you travel back 7 years and there you meet Nabooru, a Gerudo woman who is rebelling against Ganondorf. She asks you to squeeze into this tunnel and retrieve the silver gauntlets for her. So, the first part of the dungeon is done as Child Link. You got interesting puzzles, you use bomb chews, and eventually you fight the mini-boss, an Iron Knuckle. These are like the best enemies in the whole game as they actually really test your combat skills. You have to be more precise with when you decide to hit and when you need to dodge. At last you get the silver gauntlets, but when you return to the entrance, you witness Nabooru being captured by the twin sister witches, Kotake and Koume. So, you have to take matters into your own hands, traveling again 7 years into the future and returning to the dungeon as Adult Link, where you can now use the silver gauntlets yourself to progress further. You might think, well, this is an okay dungeon item I guess, but after progressing through some more puzzles and fighting yet another Iron Knuckle, you get a second dungeon item, the Mirror Shield, which allows you to reflect both light and magic. Eventually, you do a bigger light-themed puzzle to get the boss key and finally enter the boss room, where you're met with the Twin Witches and another Iron Knuckle who they command to fight you. Upon beating this Iron Knuckle, however, it is actually revealed to be Nabooru, who the witches brainwashed. So, it's time for revenge. You enter the boss room to fight the Twin Witches, who are known together as Twin Rova. One of them has ice powers and the other has fire, so the first phase is spent reflecting magic from one twin onto the other until they eventually fuse together for phase 2. Which sees you trying to charge up your shield with 3 of the same element before reflecting a very powerful blast at the fused sisters. Rinse and repeat, and that's the fight. God, this dungeon is great, and it makes sense as it's the final real dungeon before the end of the game, so it's kind of a penultimate culmination of all the dungeons that came before it. Great theming, enchanting music, fun puzzles, awesome mini-bosses, and a spectacular final boss. And again, I love the fact that you have to play part of the dungeon as Child Link and the other part as Adult. I can definitely see why people like the Forest Temple more, but this is absolutely my favorite dungeon in Ocarina of Time. So there you have it. Again, I will be covering Ganon's Tower along with the other final challenge dungeons of every 3D Zelda after I've covered each individual game. Oh shit, wait, I just remembered there's also 3 mini dungeons in this game. Rapid fire ranking. Number 3, Bottom of the Well. The Redeads are annoying and falling through invisible floor holes fucking sucks. Number 2, Gerudo Fortress. Sneaking around is kind of a nuisance, but fighting the Gerudo warriors is pretty fun, plus the carpenters are very silly. And number 1, Ice Cavern. Yeah, the ice physics sucks, but this one has a few fun puzzles, and I like the icy music a lot. Okay, that's it. See ya!